They tell you the most wonderful, awful things. And you're going to hear them too.
Myself and two friends decided to play with a Ouija board. The first time we played with it, it claimed to be my great-great-aunt, whom I never met, but was told she supposedly killed 3 out of her 4 husbands. I got a bad feeling and stopped playing, and after that, whatever it was claimed to be my friend's dad. My friend had been talking to it for hours, and finally tricked it into answering a question wrong, and it went crazy, cussing all of us. We put the board away, but then smelled something burning. We could only smell it in the room that we had played with the board. We threw the board out and the smell went away, but whatever it was that had been talking to us didn't leave me alone for years. It would go away, sometimes for months, but eventually it came back. I think that it's gone now. I've moved 3 times and spent a lot of time in prayer and had missionaries bless my homes. I also once contacted a demonologist and followed their tips on ridding my home of it. At one point, it had gotten so bad my husband and I were seeing it, and something was scaring my son by whispering his name in his ear. He's still terrified to go into the back bedrooms alone, and I actually started making my son sleep together, with a Bible between them. One night, I woke up and saw what looked like an extremely small man in very old army clothes. It didn't look like a midget, and I'm sorry if that offends anyone. I just don't know how else to explain this. It looked like a very normal man, but around 4 feet tall, and gray. He just looked at me, and after I blinked, he was gone. I don't know where he fits in all of this, but for some reason, he didn't scare me. The other thing, though, that's another story. I'm not sure my husband really believed me until he actually saw it. And then he was absolutely terrified. We were in bed and I had been hearing it for a while, and I was so paranoid that it would do something that I made my husband sleep in the bedroom with our kids, and I would sleep in the living room so one of us was on each end of the house. Well, I was used to seeing it walk up and down the hallway, and I would catch glimpses and hear its footsteps. I mean, it was incredibly scary. So, one night, my husband came into the living room shaking, and he asked if I was just in the bathroom. I told him I hadn't been, but I knew why he was asking, because I had seen it too. It was the thing. It was very big, from the floor to the ceiling and as wide as the hallway. It would just walk up and down the hallway all night. One day I woke up, and my house felt less tense. I had reached out to that demonologist and followed their steps 2 days before. I had been in a horrible depression, and my oldest son was sick a lot and had to go to monthly appointments at the children's hospital, and there were lots and lots of doctor's appointments and some visits to the emergency room. He was also on a bunch of meds, but for whatever reason, that day, it seemed like everyone was happy. Later that night, my husband and I were up really late watching TV, and something knocked on the front door. My husband got up to get it, and I yelled at him and told him that there was nothing there and to just sit back down. I had a horrible feeling. I knew it was that thing. A couple of minutes later, we heard something else hit the porch, and we both went to the windows that give you a clear view of the entire porch. Sure enough, nothing was there. Only a broom that was on the side of the porch when we came in for the night was now on the floor in front of the door. Well, that wasn't all. The knocking, despite the broom not being on the porch anymore, kept happening for 3 nights. I think it was trying to get us to let it back in. Because of everything we went through, I strongly urge people to think twice before playing with a Ouija board. It's not a game. What 3 teenage girls thought was a creepy game turned out to haunt me for 8 years. I'll always be paranoid now, always wondering if I have done something to invite it back, and wondering what it'll do next if it does get in. Hey, once you have some huge black shadow thing at least 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide walking around your house at night, and it's messing with your family, yeah, it's kind of hard to relax afterwards. Don't play with a Ouija board. I'm telling you, just don't do it. I'm an 18-year-old male from Cleveland, Texas. The city's quite small, and our school district only just became a 4A district, which, for those of you who don't know what 4A means, it just states the size of the district. 4A is a middle-sized district. Anyway, with how small the city is, I'm sure you can imagine the rumors that go around. Especially seeing as if you know one person, you practically know everyone. So there's one rumor that a lot of the elders believe, and to be honest, I think I do too. Especially after what I'm about to tell you. According to the stories the elders tell of the forest surrounding the city, out there is a beast man. I'll tell you the story that was told to me when I was young. About the year 1997, there was a couple that decided to go hunting in the woods surrounding the city. They said that they'd be out there for 4 days. A day and a half in, the wife decided that she didn't like the outdoors and told her husband she was going home. He told her that he was fine and he would be back on the 4th day, and that if she came looking for him, his camp would not move. So the wife gathered her things and went home. She had gone about her daily life up until the 4th day, when the husband had never come home. So, like any normal person, she got worried and went to the camp. Keep in mind that this was a time when phones were still bricks and not very popular. After arriving at the camp, she found everything normal. The fire had been put out, and all the gear was packed and ready to go. The thing that wasn't normal was her husband. He wasn't there. She'd called his name several times to no avail, and finally she went back to town to get help. She drove to the local police station and got help from a family friend in the force. After looking for a whole day and still unable to find her husband, they filed a missing persons report and sent a search party the next day. Towards the end of that day, someone found him dead. His clothes were all torn in two, and he had lacerations all over him. His chest was hollowed out from the bottom of the rib cage all the way up to his sternum. His stomach had been ripped open. Where they found him was in a nest. Apparently, the nest looked like a buzzard's nest, but big enough for 4 grown men to sit in, and it was on the ground. There were bones everywhere, even strung in the trees like wind chimes. An investigation was launched that day. The lacerations looked to be that of a large cat. The eaten-out stomach and chest were said to be the work of a dog. During the time the scene was being investigated, police reported seeing strange things in the woods, like a person watching them from just beyond the tree line that disappeared and seeing an animal where they last saw it. Each time, it was a different animal. They also reported hearing what sounded like a person trying to roar like a bear and howl like a wolf all in one go. The local police force was unable to figure out what had killed the man. They also tried to cover up the investigation, but with the town being so small, things don't go unnoticed. Skipping forward 12 years, I decided to go camping with a couple of friends out in those same woods. We were planning on staying out there for 3 days, but it got cut short. It was the first night, and we were all sitting around the fire talking about video games. One in particular was an RPG called Skyrim. Suddenly, a man in an orange vest holding a hunting rifle showed up, and he said he was out there to hunt for pigs and asked us to keep it quiet, as to not disturb him or scare off the animals. So as the unarmed people we were, we politely said yes, and then we all went to sleep. We were woken up in the middle of the night from the sound of the hunter's gun. We heard the gun go off 3 times in a row, back to back, before it subsided. We all shrugged it off and went back to sleep, or that's what I thought. Apparently one of the guys I was with decided he was too nervous to go back to sleep. In the morning, we all decided to gather our things and head out. We didn't want to stay out there so long as there was someone hunting so close by. 3 days later, on the local Cleveland news, they had a report of a story of a hunter found dead in the woods, mauled by an unknown creature, lying in a very large nest, surrounded by bones. When they showed a picture of the man who died, it was the same man we saw that night. I called the guys I was with that night and told them about this new information. The one that had stayed up that night had told me he heard what sounded like a very high-pitched roar while we were all asleep. He said he didn't want to tell us because he didn't want to freak us out. When he said that, I instantly remembered the story of the couple back in 1997. I never believed that story until now. Don't take the stories your grandparents tell you for granted. Not only are those stories their legacy, but it's also their advice and warnings to us younger generations. I am writing about this for the first time. It has been 23 years, and I have never spoken of it before. I thought this may be the time to write about this event, so I can just bury it, so to speak. In 1984, I was 22 years old. I had moved in with my best friend, Justin, and we shared the expense of his mobile home. We didn't rent the mobile home, as it was a used unit that Justin had purchased. He and I spent most of our free time partying with as many girls as we could. It was the typical bachelor pad, and although it was just a temporary place to live, we still called it home. We'd lived there about 6 months when strange things began to happen. Justin and I were folding clothes in the master bedroom. It was about 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening, and everything was normal. We had the stereo on and were playing albums. My stereo was a Monteverdi system, which had a mute button on the front. It was a large square button which, when pressed in, locked into mute mode. In the middle of a song, the house went quiet, and we looked at each other and began to walk down the hallway to the living room. When we looked at the stereo to determine what had happened, we both saw that the mute button had been pressed in and locked into place. We both just looked at each other because we were both together when this happened, and the doors to the outside were locked. We just released the mute button and then went on about our evening. A few days later, things began to happen that had never happened before. Dishes, pots, pans, and glasses would start rattling in the kitchen. They made enough noise that it drowned out the TV, and it sounded like someone was having a fight with our dishes. We would walk into the kitchen, and as soon as we stepped in, the noise would stop. This occurred almost every night thereafter, even when we had friends over. Most of our friends, except those who were too scared, tried to sneak into the kitchen to catch a glimpse of the noisemaker. As soon as someone went into the kitchen, the noise would stop. As the weeks rolled on, things started to escalate. One night, I was dozing off to sleep, and I heard the sound of crystal, as if someone was ringing a crystal bell. I stepped out of bed, and the noise stopped, and this continued each night at exactly the stroke of midnight. Justin worked third shift, thus I was alone in the house most nights from 10:30 until I left for work in the morning. After about 2 weeks of this, I'd gotten so used to the sound, I just gave up trying to find out the source. But then, the haunting took a turn for the worse. I was drifting off to sleep, and I heard the crystal again. I opened my eyes, and standing at the foot of the bed was a figure of an entity. It was so black, blacker than pitch black. I slept with no lights on in the house. Even the outside lights had been turned off. Yet this entity, which stood at the foot of my bed, was blacker than the darkness in the room. It had the shape of a person dressed in a hooded robe, and it began to stretch its hand out to me. Actually, as the figure was so dark, all I could see was an arm, so I sat up in the bed, but it didn't disappear as one might expect. I sat there frozen in fear. I could feel the presence of this entity so strongly that all I could say was, "In the name of Jesus, I rebuke you." You gotta understand that, although I have a Christian background, at that time I was a partier and was not a person you would describe as a Christian. Yet from somewhere deep within me, those words came out. As soon as I spoke them, it disappeared, but not before I heard,
"Death is very close."
I heard this whisper, I think, more in my mind than with my natural ears. Again, it scared me so bad, I had to get up and make a drink to just calm my nerves. A few weeks later, my friends and I were on our way to a bonfire campout. We had planned this outing all summer, and we found a perfect spot on a friend's land. On the first evening of the outing, tragedy struck. My friends, Justin and Scott, collided head-on while riding trail bikes, and Justin lost the use of his arm permanently, and Scott was in the hospital for months. They both lived, but to this day they carry the scars of that evening, and the arm that is no longer functioning, and in a knee and hip that require braces. I've read that similar encounters have resulted in some kind of warning to help prevent tragedy. I don't believe that this was the intention in this case. I never felt anything good about this whole ordeal, but rather I felt that something had set out to harm us. The next day after the accident, I moved out. I never went back, and I have never experienced a haunting since. All I can say is that even though no one died, 2 very close friends live with permanent scars due to that accident.